Hi guys, welcome to another exciting video on Java. Today we're going to look at a few more topics. We have already looked at a topic called as packages. Okay, how to use packages in Java. It is very similar to creating folders in Windows or any operating system, right? And then we looked at another topic called as access protections, right? Under access protections we looked at a few modifiers and specifiers which basically enhance the security of your Java code, and then we looked at an example for that, right? Today we're going to look at few more topics from second unit. I will see you on the other side. Thank you. Alright, so we are back with another new topic today from your second unit. It's an important topic because normally this topic is not there in your C or C++ program that you have already learned, right? So this interfaces is a very new concept in Java, so make sure you listen to this concept very carefully. It's different, right? So remember, it is very similar. We will see what the differences are, right? Interfaces are very similar to something called as classes, right? Classes has a collection of methods, right, and variables that you define in a particular class. So it is very similar to a class. Interfaces are very similar to a class, but a few differences are there. So we'll see what the differences are. First difference is that when you want to access any particular method in a class, in a normal class, you have to create an object for that class or an instance variable it is called as. Once that instance variable or object has been created for that class, then using that object or instance variable, I can access a function within a class. Okay, that is how a class works. But when you talk about interfaces, we cannot create objects or instance variables for interfaces. Then how to access? We'll see that a little later in the video, right? That is one first big difference between your class and an interface. That is, classes you can create instance variables or objects. Interfaces, you cannot create an instance variable or an object for an interface. And the second difference is, you use a keyword for class, you use a keyword called class, right? For interface, you have to use a keyword called interface. That is another difference, right? And third biggest difference you have here is that, remember, in your classes, you can have concrete methods. Okay, you can have concrete methods only. But when you talk about interfaces, interfaces contain only abstract methods. Now, what do you mean by an abstract method? What do you mean by a concrete method? Yeah, it looks new, right? Normally people do not come across these words daily, right? So concrete method is a method where basically it is defined in the same class where it is declared. That means within a class, if I write a function called testing, right? After that function has been declared, within the curly braces, I can define what that function is doing right there. That is called as a concrete method. It is declared as well as defined in the same place. Hence, it is called as concrete method. Now, we have another type of method called as abstract method. Now, what do you mean by abstract method? Abstract method is a method where the function is only declared. It is not defined. Wherever you have declared the function, you can only declare it, but you cannot define in the same place with the curly braces. That is called as an abstract method. So now you can see the difference that interfaces contain only abstract methods and classes can contain only concrete methods. Okay. Now I'll tell you how to use interfaces. Now, fourth big difference is, whenever you talk about classes, you have a concept called as inheritance, right? You have different inheritances. We have already talked about in the previous videos something called as single inheritance, multi-level inheritance, hierarchical inheritance, hybrid inheritance, and we looked at one more last one called as multiple inheritance. But remember, I said multiple inheritance is not supported for classes in Java, okay, because of there is some problem called as ambiguity in functions, right? Now, I will tell that in another video what it exactly means, but because of the ambiguity of the function names in two different classes, that is the reason multiple inheritance is not supported for classes in Java, but multiple inheritance is supported for interfaces in Java. Okay, so that is a very important thing. That is another difference that you should know. What is the difference between class and interfaces? So next, You can see it on the screen. One another point is that any number of classes can implement an interface. Now one very important thing here, you can see there is a word called implement. Normally when you want to inherit parent class properties into a child class, now what you normally do is you have to write the child class name, extends keyword, and then write the parent class name, so that this child class can inherit the properties of the parent class, right? But instead of using extends keyword in interface, you will use something called as implements. A class can implement an interface. Now why do you write implements? Remember, I just now told you interfaces contain only abstract methods. So those methods have to be defined. Where should it be defined? Within the class. So your classes will implement your interface. That means the methods which are defined in your interface need to be defined in the class which is implementing that interface. Okay, so you make sure you know this point, right? So that is what another difference is between a class and an interface. You have to use the keyword called implements instead of extends. Okay, so you can see a small syntax there, how interface actually looks like. So you can see there it starts with the name called interface. Okay, and you can give a name for the interface. Within that you can declare variables. Now remember, all very important point, all the variables will be declared as static and final. Okay, all the variables by default will be declared as static and final, and all the methods are abstract methods, right? The methods will not be defined within the interface. The methods will be implemented or defined in my class which implements that interface. Okay, so we will move on to the next slide, guys. Alright, I hope you are able to see the new slide. Now in this case, I just want to tell you a few points again, that I just now told you that variables, you can see the first line in the slide, it says variables in interfaces are implicitly final and static. That means you can go through some other videos that I've done. Basically final means that you cannot change the value if the variable has been declared as final. Okay, for example, you write final int I is equal to 4. The value for that variable I, which has been initialized to 4, cannot be changed again. That is the reason why that final keyword will be used. Now static keyword that you can use there before a variable name, for example, or method name. So normally you can write static int I is equal to 4. Now what that means is, normally the space for that variable will be allocated at the runtime of the program. If you want to allocate the space at the compile time of the program itself, then you can normally go for using something called as a static keyword. So remember, in interfaces, all your variables are by default declared as static and final, right? If you do not write static or final keyword there in front of your variable name, it does not matter, it automatically takes it as a final and a static variable, right? So that's a very important thing you should know. And you can see an example there of an interface. It says interface space callback. Now the keyword for declaring an interface is the keyword interface, and the name of the interface I have given in that example is callback, within which I have declared a abstract method. You can see there the method name is callback. Okay, and it has one parameter or one argument called int param, and then I have given a semicolon at the end. That means I have declared the function. I have not defined it there. You can see for that function I have not opened a curly braces and written something and then closed the curly braces. I just have declared that function. At the end I have given a semicolon. That is called as an abstract method. So your interfaces will contain only abstract methods, right? So you can see there on the second, the second example, you can see that, remember, the functions which are declared or the abstract functions which are declared in your interfaces should be defined by some class. Okay, you can see in the second example at the bottom, it says class client implements callback. Okay, so it means that class client, the name of the class is client, it is implementing an interface called callback. Now when you say that it is implementing a callback interface, that means that whatever functions which are declared in that callback interface should be defined in my client class. That is what it means. Remember, it is an implements keyword for an interface. So your class client is implementing a callback interface. Whatever interfaces are declared in my callback interface need to be implemented or defined in my class called client. So you can see there within that class called client, I have defined my function callback. Okay, in callback I have written the parameter called int p. Okay, and inside that open and close curly braces, I have written a println statement. I have printed a statement. That means I have defined what that function is going to do. It is basically going to print callback called with so and so, right? That is what is going to get printed. So this is a very basic example of how interfaces work in Java, guys. So remember, all your interfaces will have only abstract methods, and the variables by default are taken as static and final. Okay, and the classes which want to implement that particular interface need to define that particular function which is declared in your interface. That's a condition, right? So make sure you have understood this topic. If you have any further questions on this interface, guys, you can definitely ask me anytime. We will see a small example on this right now, guys. Alright, you are able to see this Eclipse screen in front of you, guys, and I have created a program, a small example of how an interface works in Java, guys. So we'll just go through it quickly. So in the previous example, I've already told you that initially normally the first line of your program will have a line called as package, right? You can declare a package. A package is nothing but a folder that needs to be created in your src folder. So initially you have to write in which folder or package your program is going to be stored. So in this case, a package called testing or a folder testing has been created in which this program is going to be stored, right? Next, now these are the comments. I've just explained what this program is about here. This is just comments. So these lines will not be processed by the compiler, guys. Remember, this is a multi-line comment. Okay, next we're going to start. So in this first line, you can see here, I have declared an interface. The name of my interface is callback. Okay, and in my interface, I have declared a function called as callback. Now, there make sure that you know that this is not an constructor, guys. You can see here, this is a capital C used for this callback as the interface name, and this particular callback has a small letter c. So this is not a constructor. Remember, we have already learned what a constructor is. A class name and the method names, if it is exactly the same, right, then it is called as a constructor. But here this is not considered as constructor, because remember, this Java is case sensitive, and the interface class name interface name starts with a capital C, and this function starts with a small c. So this is a normal abstract function. Okay, so I have this does not return any value, so that is why we have given here void. There is the function name called callback, in which we have declared a parameter, one parameter or argument called int param, right? Now remember, this is only a declaration. At the end we have given a semicolon. Remember, normally at the end of a declaration of a method, you will not give a semicolon. You will open the curly braces and then you write whatever you want to define in that function and then close the curly braces. But in this case, we are not defining it in my interface here. We are going to just declare it. Hence, we have given a semicolon at the end, right? Next, we'll continue. You can see here we have created a class called client, right? This client class is implementing the callback interface. Okay, so remember, I just now told you previously that if the class implements that particular interface, now in this case it is callback, then in this callback interface, whatever function has been declared needs to be defined here. Okay, so that is why here you can see here I have defined a function called callback. Okay, and this is public so that anyone can access it. No return type, and the name is callback, and a parameter called p, which is of type integer, and I'm just printing that whatever I want in that particular function. So in this case I'm printing callback called with whatever value will be there in p. We have still not seen what is there. We will see a little later. Okay, next we have another function, a class called as client2. Now this client2 class is also implementing a callback interface. So remember, whichever class implements that callback interface, make sure that class also defines whatever method, abstract method is there in the interface, right? So in this case, again I have to define that callback function here, right? Same thing as the previous one, callback, one parameter, and here in this case also I am printing the same exact thing. And in this class called client2, I have defined a interface function which is declared, abstract function which is declared in that interface. I have defined it here. But apart from that, I have another concrete method. This is a concrete method, guys. Remember, the method which is declared and defined in the same place is normally called as concrete method. So in this case, this is a function called non-iface meth. That is the name of the function, and this is the return type. No return value is given here, void, and it is going to print whatever is there inside this. That is, classes that implement interfaces may also define other members too, right? That is what is going to get printed when it goes into this function. Now we will see how the steps of the execution a little later. Next, we have another function, another class called as another client. This is also implementing a callback interface. Okay, and in this again I am defining callback abstract method which is declared in my callback interface, right? So this is the definition of it. Same thing. Now it is going to print two things. That is another version of callback, and p squared is, it will square that and it will show the value, right? So we will see the execution, the steps of the execution now. Obviously remember, your class name is testinterface.java, and the class name also is the same because this class contains your main function, right? So your program starts from this function called main function. It goes inside this main, right? And inside this I have declared initially a object. Now a very important thing, please listen carefully. On the left hand side I have written the interface name called callback. After that I have given a space. I have declared a C. That C is an object for the class client. It is not, C is not the object for the interface callback. Remember, we have already seen interfaces, we cannot create objects or instance variables. The C is called as instance variable or a object. The C object or instance variable will be created for the class called client. But on the left hand side, when you write this callback interface as your name, it means that the C is a reference variable of type callback interface. Okay, C is a reference variable of type callback. C is not a object or instance variable of callback. C is a instance variable or object of client class. Remember that, it's a very important thing. Okay. After this first statement, that is you have created an object called C for my client class or a reference for callback. Then in the second statement, I have created an object called C2 of type client2 class, okay, or an instance variable C2 for that client2 class, okay. And remember, this new keyword is to allocate some space in the memory, right, for that particular object, right. Next, another object I have created for this another client class. Remember, we have three classes: another client, client, and client2. So there are three classes. For each of the classes I have created the object. So another client, there is an object called OB that has been created. Next, now we are going to call the different functions within those classes. The way you can do it is, you can write, obviously you can see here, it is C2. C2 is nothing but your object of client2 class. Using that C2 object and a dot operator, I am accessing the function called non-iface method. Remember, previously I have told you this non-iface method is a concrete method. It is not an abstract method because this has not been declared in my interface. It is just a new method which has been defined in my client2 class. So as soon as this line executes, it will go to this function called non-interface method and it will print this line. Right, that is the first line that will get printed. Classes that implement interfaces may also define other members too. That is what is going to get printed in the first line. Next, after that, we are going to call using this object called C. Remember, this C object is of type client class, right? So using the C, I am calling the function called callback, which is defined in my client class. Okay, so it will go to this particular client class and it will go to this function called callback and it will print this particular value. So you can see here we are passing a parameter called 42, or the value for that P is nothing but your 42, right? So you can see here it will go to this particular function called callback. We are passing the value 42 and here it will just get into this function and print callback called with 42. That is the second line that will get printed. Right? Next, after that it will go to this particular line. Now in this line there is a small change. Remember, this is very important. Now remember, C was initially pointing to the object of the class, or basically it was an object of the class client. But now the reference for this, sorry, yeah, now initially this C was pointing to this client class, right, or it was the space was allocated for this particular class for this using this instance variable. But now we are changing the location or the location for that particular object. That is, now we are writing C is equal to OB. Now OB is what? OB is nothing but the object of another client class. That is this last class that we have implemented here. It is the object for that. So now C will be referring to this particular location. Okay. So you can see a C now refers to another client object, or this C is now referring to OB, right? So if I write C dot callback again 42, it will not go to this client function, it will go to this particular another client class in which I am calling this function called callback, and it will print these two lines, another version of callback. It will print, and the next line it will print p squared is 42 times 42. That is what is going to get printed. I will just quickly run this program and you can see the output, guys. So as I have defined, the same thing is being shown here, guys. Initially it will print the first line, that is this particular line that you have seen here. Okay. Next, in the next line it is calling C dot callback 42. So in this case it will go to this particular client class and this function, and it will print callback called with 42, right? And the last line you can see here, this C dot callback 42 is referring to this callback of this particular class, and it will print another version of callback, and p squared is 42 times 42, that is 1764. So this is a simple example of how interfaces work, guys. I hope you have understood all these the complete program. If you have any questions, you can definitely ask me, you can ping me, you can email me, right? Please share with as many people as you can, right? Like this video, right? And please stay tuned. I will be coming back with more videos. Thank you for watching, guys. See you soon in another video. Bye.